Sophie Cunningham has just done what no other WNBA player has dared to do. She's broken the system. The very media that's long ignored women's sports, she's taken control of it. But how did one player manage to turn the tables on an entire industry that's been holding women athletes back for decades? You won't believe the bold move she made to shatter the media's grip on the game, and trust me, this changes everything. Sophie Cunningham is no longer just a name in the WNBA, she's a force, a phenomenon who's not only dominating on the court, but also capturing the attention of fans and critics alike off it. She's been a key player for the Indiana Fever, but what truly sets Sophie apart isn't just her impressive skills or her determination, it's the way she's managed to outsmart the media at its own game. A few years ago, Sophie was a rising star, steadily gaining recognition for her athleticism and passion for the game. Yet, despite her undeniable talent, the mainstream sports media still overlooked her. She was just another player under the radar until she wasn't. Recently, Cunningham made a bold move that completely redefined the way women's sports are represented. The media had always controlled the narrative, placing the spotlight on a handful of athletes while leaving the rest to fight for scraps. But Sophie didn't accept this. She refused to wait for the media to give her the attention she deserved. Instead, she took matters into her own hands, using her voice and her platform in a way that no other athlete had. What Sophie did next was nothing short of revolutionary. She knew the media didn't want to cover her, and she also knew that she had the power to change that. With one strategically timed post, she bypassed the traditional media outlets and went straight to the fans. This wasn't just another social media stunt, this was a calculated move that took the media world by surprise. She didn't just ask for attention, she demanded it, calling out the system that had kept her and countless others in the shadows. And the reaction? It was nothing short of explosive. But was this all part of Sophie's plan from the beginning? Some are saying her rise wasn't just about her on-court performance, it was about her careful manipulation of the media narrative. The speculation around this strategic move is intense, and while we can't say for sure, one thing is clear. Sophie Cunningham knew exactly what she was doing. The real question is, how did she know the media system was this broken, and why did she decide to go after it now? What made her take this massive leap when no one else dared to? It's a question that's been circulating, and it's one we're about to dive deep into. For decades, women's sports have been sidelined by the media, treated as an afterthought while male athletes bask in the limelight. The coverage has been minimal, and when it is there, it's often limited to a few brief mentions during big events like the WNBA Finals or the Olympics. Outside of those moments, female athletes have been left fighting for attention, their stories barely making it past the headlines. The constant cycle of underrepresentation has created a media landscape where women's sports are considered secondary, often not worthy of the same detailed coverage or investment as their male counterparts. This has been the reality for players like Sophie Cunningham, who, despite her undeniable talent, found herself struggling to get the media coverage she deserved. It wasn't just about playing the game, it was about being seen. The harsh reality was that the media had little interest in covering her journey unless it was part of a larger narrative or, in some cases, when things were at their worst. For a long time, female athletes were expected to be grateful for whatever scraps of coverage they received, but Sophie refused to accept this. She wasn't content with just being another underrepresented athlete. She wanted more, and she wasn't going to wait for the media to decide she was worthy of their time. She understood that the media didn't know how to handle the rise of women in sports, especially when those women were willing to take control of their own narratives. The media system was built to keep athletes like Sophie in check, confined to the margins where their stories wouldn't challenge the status quo. Yet, Sophie's decision to break the mold came at a crucial time when women athletes were starting to demand more. The number Time's Up movement, the rise of female empowerment in sports, and the increasing number of women leading conversations about equality were all signals that things were changing. And Sophie Cunningham? She was right at the forefront of this change, knowing exactly what she had to do to shatter the traditional narrative. But Sophie didn't stop there. No, she took it even further. She didn't just challenge the system from the outside, she got right into the heart of it, calling out the flaws in the media's coverage and bringing attention to the fact that women's sports are a force to be reckoned with. By speaking up, Sophie became not just an athlete, but a voice for an entire movement. And when she called out the media, it was more than just a statement. It was a challenge to everything the system had stood for. Sophie Cunningham didn't just sit back and wait for the media to recognize her, she made sure they couldn't ignore her. The traditional media system had long dictated how female athletes were portrayed, often pushing them to the sidelines. Sophie understood that the system wasn't going to change unless athletes took it into their own hands. And that's exactly what she did. Instead of depending on reporters or networks to shape her narrative, Sophie decided to control it herself. With the rise of social media, she saw an opportunity to bypass the gatekeepers of traditional media and go straight to the fans. What Sophie did next was a masterstroke. Using her platform, she became a vocal advocate for women's sports, sharing her thoughts on the struggles women face in the industry and calling out the underrepresentation of female athletes. One of her most viral posts, which left the media world in shock, was a direct message to her fans and the public about the inequalities in the coverage of women's sports. She didn't just quietly advocate for change, she made her frustrations loud and clear, forcing the media to pay attention to her. Her strategy wasn't a fluke. It was a calculated move to force the media to reckon with the demands of female athletes. The results were immediate. Not only did her social media following explode, but so did the conversation around women's sports. Sophie's words struck a nerve with fans who were tired of seeing their favorite athletes go unrecognized. The backlash from her post was swift, but it also opened up doors. Sponsors and media outlets suddenly realized they could no longer afford to ignore women like Sophie. She had used her voice in a way that demanded respect, but she also showed her audience just how powerful their collective support could be. Sophie Cunningham wasn't just a player, she was a movement. And it all started with that one bold post. But was this move entirely unplanned? The speculation around Sophie's sudden rise is wild. Some have suggested that her boldness was calculated from the beginning, that Sophie knew exactly how to play the media game. And given how quickly her social media following skyrocketed after her posts, it's hard not to wonder if this was always part of her strategy. Could this have been a deliberate attempt to not only disrupt the WNBA's media landscape, but also position herself as the face of the change in women's sports media? The buzz around her actions certainly suggests that Sophie was thinking 2 steps ahead. By calling out the media, Sophie Cunningham didn't just expose the flaws in the system, she blew the doors open. For the first time in history, a WNBA player wasn't afraid to confront the elephant in the room, the lack of fair and equal coverage for women's sports. Sophie's decision to take the media system head-on wasn't just brave, it was revolutionary. The response from fans and critics alike was overwhelming. It wasn't just Sophie getting attention anymore, it was the conversation about the inequality that women athletes face. The media, which had long been comfortable with the status quo, found itself scrambling. But Sophie wasn't the only one questioning the media system. More and more athletes began following her lead, speaking out about their own experiences with underrepresentation. Rumors began to circulate that the WNBA, as an institution, was struggling with how to navigate the rapidly changing dynamics between players, media, and fans. There were whispers that some executives were worried about the future of women's sports media and whether traditional networks could keep up with the demands of a new generation of athletes who refused to be silenced. Sophie had done more than speak up. She had shifted the narrative entirely, and now the media had to adapt. But, of course, not everyone was thrilled with Sophie's bold moves. Some traditional media outlets reacted defensively, accusing Sophie of disrespecting the hard work that had gone into the industry's coverage of women's sports. These voices claimed that Sophie's actions were undermining the very system that had brought women's sports into the mainstream. But was it really the system that needed to be protected, or was it the outdated ways of thinking that Sophie had challenged? As the media struggled to catch up, it became clear. Sophie Cunningham wasn't just a basketball player, she was a symbol of what happens when the system is forced to evolve. Sophie Cunningham's rise isn't just a story about one player, it's a story about how an entire generation of athletes is refusing to let the media dictate their worth. The impact of Sophie's actions is still unfolding, but one thing is clear. She's not just opening doors for herself, she's paving the way for other athletes to take control of their own stories. The buzz around Sophie's media revolution has sparked a larger conversation about how other athletes can use their platforms to push for more visibility. Experts are now saying that Sophie's actions could be the catalyst for a movement that forever changes the way women's sports are covered. If athletes like Sophie continue to call out the system, the media will have no choice but to listen. The most fascinating part, Sophie isn't just creating ripples in the WNBA, her influence is spreading across all sports. Women's soccer, tennis, and even track and field are seeing athletes take a page out of Sophie's book. Sophie Cunningham has become a leader in the fight for equality in sports media, but more importantly, she's proving that athletes, not just the media, should hold the power to shape their stories. This is a turning point for women's sports, and Sophie is at the center of it all. Of course, where there's success, there's always backlash. While Sophie's critics have been vocal, many insiders suggest that her boldness has made her a target. The same media outlets that Sophie exposed for their lack of coverage now find themselves grappling with the consequences of her actions. The backlash against Sophie's outspokenness has been swift and harsh, with some suggesting that her future endorsements and media opportunities could be in jeopardy. However, Sophie's supporters argue that this is exactly what makes her so important. She's not just challenging the system, she's making it uncomfortable. She's pushing boundaries, and it's clear that some people are uncomfortable with that. But that discomfort is also what's making her so powerful. The media can't ignore Sophie anymore. They can't continue to sweep issues under the rug. She's forced the conversation to the surface, and there's no going back. The question is, will Sophie continue to face resistance, or will the media ultimately be forced to change to keep up with the new generation of outspoken athletes? Sophie Cunningham's actions have changed the game. She's forced the media to confront its own biases and outdated practices, and in doing so, she's sparked a conversation that will shape the future of women's sports. As more athletes follow her lead, the landscape of media coverage for female athletes is poised for a massive shift. The old guard can no longer maintain its stranglehold on women's sports. Sophie Cunningham has broken the system, and now it's up to the next generation of athletes to carry the torch forward. Sophie's not just a player on the court, she's a trailblazer who's reshaping the entire industry. And as she continues to push boundaries, one thing is certain, she's changing the way we view women's sports forever. What happens next? Only time will tell, but we're watching closely.